Image-based sexual abuse, commonly referred to as revenge porn, is the act of sharing intimate images of someone without their consent. In Ireland, there are no legal ramifications or criminal liability attached to the non-consensual posting and sharing of intimate images. In 2017, Labour's Brendan Howlin introduced the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Bill, which would criminalise image-based sexual abuse. The bill seemed destined to remain in legislative limbo when it lapsed following the May 2019 election. I sat down with Caroline Cunningham, who works with the Rape Crisis Network Ireland, to talk all about why we need this legislation. So hi Caroline, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today and taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk to me.
Not at all, Erica. You're very welcome.
So, of course, today we're going to be chatting about the effects of image-based sexual abuse. For anyone listening who might be unaware or maybe not up to date, would you be able to explain a bit about what that actually is and why it's important that it's considered a crime?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I suppose the first thing to say, Erica, is that image based sexual abuse can take many forms. One of them is often, to my mind, erroneously referred to as revenge porn in inverted commas, whereby a person who is in possession of an intimate image, which may have been taken or shared with consent, an intimate image of their partner or former partner, or indeed somebody else, decides for their own reasons to share it widely on the internet, so that it's possible that with one stroke of the keyboard, literally one press on a key, somebody's entire life could be upended and devastated as their intimate image is shared widely among all their friends, acquaintances, colleagues, family members, and others. And in the more extreme forms of this, it can end up in very much in the public domain and be shared widely on, I hate to mention it, but on porn sites and places like that. It's very, very unpleasant experience. So that's one form of it. Another form on it is what's sometimes called form of it is sometimes called sextortion, whereby the person in possession of the intimate image threatens the person whose intimate image it is with publication unless they do something. Could be anything, could be give them money, could be do them a favor which they wouldn't normally want to do them, could be have sex with them, could be any number of things. The motivation is really um, immaterial from the point of view of the victim. And a more recent one that I've come across is now that's but these are by no means the only two. These are just some of the most obvious. More recently and very disturbingly, I've come across a scenario where a sexual offense, such as a rape or a serious sexual assault, is literally planned and staged by usually more than one perpetrator, and then of their number, one films the whole thing, and then the film of the actual act of sexual violence, can you imagine, is distributed on the internet, including to these porn sites and other even more sinister darknet kind of places. So they're just three forms. And I suppose the fourth one I'd add to that is what's often referred to as deep faking, whereby a person might share entirely innocently photos of their grad or a party, a social occasion. Everybody is fully clothed, and then somehow these images are hacked into and they reappear, but with the naked private parts of other individuals, total strangers, as it were, grafted onto the original image of, which is a fully clothed image. Um, so that's deep faking. That's a very disturbing and an unpleasant form of the abuse. And as to the harm that it can do, it can be absolutely devastating for individuals. And The trouble about it is, Erica, there is a certain amount that you can do. Certainly there is, and we would urge people, wherever they're aware of the identity of the platform where these images appear, to please get straight on to whatever the platform is and ask them to take down those images. And I think there's much more responsiveness on the part of the industry to this now. And that's all fine, that's great. But unfortunately, as far as the criminal law is concerned, there's kind of a gap, because if you decide for your own purposes that you're going to distribute an intimate image of a child, well, there's all sorts of what is technically called child pornography legislation in Part 2 of the 2017 Act, which will make a criminal of you if you're involved in the creation, the distribution, the selling, anything, anything to do with the creation and distribution of these images. There's a raft of offences, but there's not a corresponding, if you like, layer of offences where the intimate image is one of an adult. And that's where this new harassment, harmful communications and related offences bill, which is coming back to the Dáil tomorrow, will, we hope, fill the gap so that the distribution without consent of intimate images of adults will now become an offence. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Thanks so much for explaining it in such a clear way. Um, as you just mentioned there, the harassment, harmful communications, and related offences bill. It was there was government support secured to amend it, I believe, in May 2019, and the current minister has now committed to prioritising it. Obviously, with what happened kind of in the last few weeks, it's been more so in the public eye again now. Um, but when can we actually expect to see it implemented? When will it take effect if it does pass through the Dáil and go through all these stages? When will people see it actually, being able to be used, and no people no longer being able to get away with sharing these images with absolutely zero ramifications for them?
Well, um, uh, the short answer is we don't absolutely know. I do know that the minister's stated intention is that the bill will get through all its Oireachtas stages, i.e., complete its remaining stages 3, 4, and 5 in the Dáil, and go through stages 1 through 5 in the Seanad, and get to Áras an Uachtaráin to be signed into law by Christmas. Now, in legislative terms, that's a pretty breathless timetable. It really is. It's ambitious. Is it possible? Yes, it most certainly is. I have seen this happen at warp speed before. It's quite a complicated bill, and then just today, the on the Oireachtas website was published a list of, gosh, I think it's 50, yes, 50 amendments there too. So much so that they've actually unusually set aside 2 slots for a select committee hearing this week. Now, that to me betokens urgency and seriousness that the government, and I understand that there's all party support for this. This goes beyond the government parties. Um, I understand that there's a huge will to progress this across the House. But of course, as you know, once a bill gets as far as Áras an Uachtaráin to be signed into law by the President, that does not mean that it automatically comes into effect uh, as soon as the ink is dry on the parchment, if you like. No, that's not the case. Now, except rarely, just occasionally, a bill is expressed as coming into effect as soon as it is signed into law, but much more often, and likely also in the case of this bill, it will be signed into law and then commenced. That is brought into effect at a later date, but with all the urgency that is behind it and the momentum that there is from civil society organisations, from the public at large, and just it's been, we've needed this for so long, and the very incident that you refer to is part of that momentum too. This legislation is urgently needed. I would think that they will commence it very shortly in the new year. That's my best guess. I would be surprised if they hung around, to use a colloquial expression. I don't think they're going to sit in this one.
Yeah, I have to agree, especially, what did go on a couple of weeks ago. It was such a massive, show of support for all of the women involved and things like that. So it's really brought it into the public sphere again. Um, as well, women are disproportionately affected by this issue. Obviously, it of course does happen to men as well, but research has shown that 3 out of 4 victims of image based sexual abuse are female, and 9 out of 10 females will actually suffer from it in their lifetime, be it their news actually getting leaked or being threatened with it or things like that. So why do you think that women are more targeted than men in this particular area?
Golly, gosh, Erica, I put it down. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a great feminist theorist, just to be clear about that. But I have to say, I think there's a deep vein of misogyny there. There's still remnants of an old culture that women are somehow uh, of less value than men, and I think, honestly, I think that there's an old patriarchal streak, not just in our culture, but in many cultures across the world, whereby a woman is a good thing if she's useful, and she, if you like, her individuality, her autonomy, her dignity, her desires, her own personality are kind of subservient to whatever it is that the patriarchy wants at this time. And you may think that that's a very old fashioned idea and out of favor. And I would say, well, look at the objectification of women that there is in the porn industry. Look at it even more seriously in the industries of the the purchase of sexual services, sex trafficking, the exploitation of vulnerable women and girls for those purposes. It's hideous. It doesn't happen in anything like the same numbers to men and boys. Not that I would defend it if it did. It's appalling behavior, whoever it happens to. Yeah, so I think it's part of a, I'm sorry to say, a spectrum of attitudes and behaviors which we must all as a society still work very hard to counter. And that's why education is so important. And I think it's about much more than, if you like, as wide as it is, the confines of sexual violence and abuse in their various forms. It's about the dignity of every person and the rights of every person, and it should begin as early as possible, as early as primary school. I think is not too early to start educating people about healthy relationships and respecting the dignity of every individual.
Yeah, 100%. I really agree. I think a lot of it as well is also just generally down to there's so much missed out within the curriculum of sex education in school. Like, even the idea of consent. I have seen so much on social media in the last couple of days of people who just don't seem to grasp the fact that just because these women sent intimate photos does not give anyone else the right to share them in a public domain.
Absolutely not, and also that is another illustration of a pervasive myth about consent to any form of sexual activity or sex related, if you like, activity, such as the sharing of sexual images. And that is the idea that consent is given once and for all. You have a boyfriend, you're in a relationship, therefore, through some kind of alchemy, um, you are in some mysterious way bound to consent to anything else. You kind of are expected to provide whatever it is by the way of sex or sharing of intimate images, and any intimate images you've shared are fair game. No, they are not. And I just say to people, people should have a read of the newish definition of consent in our criminal law. You'll find it at Section 48 of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017, and it's on the easiest way to look at it is on actually on the Law Reform website. And you will there see laid out not only a positive definition of consent, but a fairly long list of situations in which there is no consent. And down at the very end of that, there is another little bit which I think is vitally important, which is that um, you absolutely have the right, once you give consent to any sexual activity, to change your mind, to withdraw that consent before or during the activity. And no less an authority than our criminal law says so. There it is in black and white. So consent is always situation dependent, it's dependent on who you're with. It changes, obviously. We're all going to consent to sex with some people and not with others. And that reflects the way things should be. So I think actually our criminal law has a powerful declarative effect, and maybe as dry as it is, we should all read it more often and let it sink in, because something has to give the lie to or has to counteract this pervasive, I call it the consent myth, whereby you give consent if you're in a relationship once and for all and to everything. No, you do not. And that's it.
Yeah, 100%. Um, so obviously, Caroline, you do some great work with the Rape Crisis Network Ireland. Um, as someone working in this area, what advice would you give to anyone who has been affected by this, be it the recent leak or obviously at any other point in time?
Absolutely, people should seek help. I mean, and I suppose the first thing I'd say, Erica, is that people can seek help from a rape crisis centre or another specialist sexual violence service. You will find information and links to all the various 16 rape crisis centres, and then there's a number of other specialist sexual violence services that don't call themselves rape crisis centres. And you'll find them on www.rapecrisishelp.ie. They're all on there. There is a 24-hour, 365-day helpline also run by Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. That's 1800 77 88 88, and that's operational 365 days a year, which is fantastic. And also, you can, as I was saying at the very beginning, you can, if you're disturbed by what you're finding online, you can certainly seek help from not only the internet service providers where you know where they are, who they are, I'm sorry, but also from An Garda Síochána, because although there are gaps in our criminal law, and this is not going to capture every form of intimate image related sexual abuse or other kinds of sexual harassment online, it's always worth having a chat with members of An Garda Síochána, because depending on the circumstances, it may be possible to prosecute somebody for something. Um, for instance, blackmail. The circumstances of the case might capture a particular incident of sextortion. With regard to harassment, it's a bit more difficult uh, because of the nature, because of how the present offence is worded. But still, there's been a recent Supreme Court case that has said that um, uh, communicating with others can also be part of a course of conduct which is defined as the criminal offence of harassment. So I'd say don't write off the idea of prosecuting them through the criminal courts until you've had a good chat with a member of An Garda Síochána. And remember, they're all specialists now. The whole country now has got access to a Divisional Protective Services unit, which is a sort of a specialist team of members of An Garda Síochána with advanced level of training in everything related to domestic and sexual and gender based violence, and a couple of other areas as well related to things like sex trafficking and also child protection and child sexual exploitation. So the help is out there. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with your local service, your local rape crisis centre. They can support you if you're considering going to An Garda Síochána. They can provide support around a Garda interview, for instance. And also, you could consider speaking to your nearest Divisional Protective Services unit of An Garda Síochána. They'd be the specialists in this area. So don't suffer alone is the message very strongly.
I think that's the most important thing. If anything like this has happened to you, just reach out to someone or a service and don't deal with it alone. There are people out there to help.